Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be exploring a really interesting paradox today. You know, our world thrives on innovation. Incredible inventions are popping up all the time.
Right.
And yet, a surprising amount of knowledge is never patented.
It really is. It is a paradox.
So our aim today is to kind of unpack that. Why is that, and what does it mean for how innovation happens?
Yeah, it's a question that kind of goes to the core of what knowledge is, really, and how different forms of knowledge are valued, especially when you look at systems like patent law.
And so our primary source for this exploration is a paper. It's by Gaede Rosenfoss, and it's called What Proportion of Knowledge is Patented? It was published in January this year,
Okay.
2025.
2025, yeah. So very recent. And this deep dive should be very relevant to you, as someone who closely follows all the developments in this field.
Right.
Because ultimately, patents have a huge impact on what gets invented, how it spreads, and ultimately how our, I guess, increasingly knowledge-driven world evolves.
Yeah. So before we even talk about patents, Rosenfoss raises this really important point. We need to kind of have a shared understanding of what knowledge actually is.
Yeah, like what are we even talking about when we say knowledge? He uses an information science perspective and breaks it down into three sort of fundamental components: data, information, and then knowledge itself.
Okay. So how would that work in a practical example? Like, let's say, learning to bake a cake.
Okay, so imagine you have a recipe, the ingredients listed, their quantities, that's data. Raw facts, right? But that's just a collection of facts. What transforms that data into information is when you start processing it, organizing it.
So like understanding that, okay, these ingredients are going to work together in this particular way to create this chemical reaction or this process.
Exactly. The role of each ingredient in the baking process. You start seeing the relationships, making sense of the data, and that provides context.
Right. It brings meaning to that raw data.
Exactly. Now, knowledge, that comes from applying that information. In this case, baking the cake.
Right. So I can read a recipe and I can understand it, but until I actually do it, I don't really have that knowledge.
Precisely. It's the doing, the practical application of your understanding. That's knowledge in action.
Mm-hmm.
So where does the patent system fit into all this?
That's the question, right? Patents, they don't cover like all knowledge, do they? They seem to have a very specific focus.
Absolutely. The focus is on incentivizing new knowledge. Gotta be new.
Okay.
Economically valuable.
Right. So it can't just be useful. It's got to have market potential.
Exactly. It's not enough for something to just be helpful. It needs to have that potential for profit. And it has to be technical in nature.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just any knowledge.
Nope. This reminds me of, Adam Smith, the economist. He talked about this paradox of value, how water, which is essential for life, is relatively cheap.
Right.
But diamonds, they have way less practical use, but they're
Yeah.
crazy expensive.
That's a good point.
Right. It highlights how the patent system is really prioritizing knowledge that has exchange value, meaning its potential for making money, even if its use value, its practical benefit might not be as obvious. And then there's the whole technical aspect. What can actually be patented is limited too.
So like I couldn't patent, I don't know, a new philosophical theory.
Exactly. Or, a groundbreaking scientific discovery, however revolutionary it might be. These things generally can't be patented. They're seen as like fundamental building blocks of knowledge.
So anyone can use them and build upon them.
Exactly. The patent system, it deals with a specific subset of knowledge, leaving a huge realm of knowledge outside its scope. And even then, even within this subset of, things that could be patented, not everything is. And that's where we get to this idea of propensity to patent. How often do inventions that meet the criteria for patent protection actually end up being patented?
And that's where the research gets really interesting because it's full of surprises.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that.
Let's do it.
So we've established that the patent system focuses on specific types of knowledge. But now I'm curious, like how much of this potentially patentable knowledge actually gets that protection, that patent protection? Where does the research take us on this exploration?
Well, some of the earliest attempts to measure this propensity to patent actually go all the way back to the 19th century. They used data from world fairs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, those big exhibitions where, they'd showcase all the cutting-edge inventions from around the world.
Like the Crystal Palace exhibition in London back in 1851.
Exactly. Or the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876,
Yeah.
where nations would come together to kind of show off their technological prowess.
You'd think, I mean, logically, you would think that a majority of those inventions on display would have been patented.
You would, right. But a researcher named Petra Moser, she analyzed inventions presented at those fairs, and she found something pretty surprising. Only about 1 in 8 or 9 were actually patented.
Wow, that's a much lower proportion than I would guessed. Even back then, at the dawn of, industrial innovation, it seems like inventors weren't always going for patent protection for every invention they could have.
Exactly. And it really makes you think about the motivations behind those decisions, like why choose to patent some and not others. And since those early estimates, numerous studies have used surveys to try and measure this propensity to patent. And as you might imagine, the results they get, they vary quite a bit.
Okay, so what have some of the more recent studies shown?
Well, back in the early 80s, an economist named Edwin Mansfield, he surveyed over 100 U.S. manufacturing firms. What he found was that the percentage of inventions that were patented ranged from 50% in industries like, say, primary metals, all the way up to 86% in the machinery industry.
Okay, so already we're seeing a pretty big range. It sounds like the industry an invention comes from plays a big role in whether it gets patented or not.
Absolutely. Industry-specific factors seem to have a big influence. Then in the early 90s, there was another study by Cohen, Nelson, and Walsh, and they actually found even lower figures. They looked at product and process innovations separately. For products, only about 49% were patented, and for processes, it was even lower at 31%.
So again, a pretty big gap between the two. It's becoming clear that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to this question of how often inventions get patented, right?
Exactly. There are so many factors at play, like the type of invention, the industry, the company's overall strategy, market dynamics.
It's complex. So I have to ask then, why would inventors choose not to patent their inventions? Even if they
Yeah.
could, what are some of the reasons?
Well, one crucial factor is this trade-off between secrecy and disclosure.
Okay.
To get a patent, you have to publicly disclose your invention in detail, right? You have to meet what they call the enablement requirement.
What?
The enablement requirement. It means you have to provide enough info for someone skilled in that field to actually replicate the invention.
Oh, okay. So it's not just about having the idea. You have to, explain it to the world. That seems like it could be a big deterrent for some inventors.
Exactly, because while the patent gives you the right to exclude others from making, using, or selling that invention for a while, that public disclosure, it can be a real risk, especially for inventions that are really hard to reverse engineer.
So, if I invented some super complex software algorithm
Yeah.
or had a unique manufacturing process that was hard to figure out, I might be better off just keeping it a secret.
Potentially, yes.
Hmm.
Companies have to weigh the benefits of, that legal protection from a patent against the risk of competitors seeing how their invention works.
It's a gamble.
Yeah. And this also helps explain why we tend to see more product inventions being patented than process inventions.
Because products are more out in the open, right? Someone could look at them and try to figure out how they're made.
Exactly. Products are observable. You can potentially reverse engineer them. But processes, those happen within a company. They can be kept secret more easily.
This whole decision-making process around patenting is fascinating. It really is like a strategic balancing act. But all the studies we've been talking about so far, they've had relatively small sample sizes, right? Can we really draw big conclusions about patenting trends from them?
That's a good point. You need a broader view. And thankfully, in 2023, a study by Mezzanotte and Simcoe tried to address that. They used data from the U.S. Census Bureau's Business R&D and Innovation Survey. It covered a massive number of firms from 2008 to 2015.
Oh, wow, that's a huge data set. So what did they find?
It was pretty striking, actually. They found that 80%, that's 80% of firms doing research and development, which you'd think leads to patentable inventions, didn't apply for any patents at all.
80%, that's a huge majority. Does that mean that most inventions are just not being formally protected?
Well, there's a catch. While most firms might not patent, they also found that the ones that do patent account for over 90% of all the R&D spending.
Interesting. So even though fewer firms are going for patents, the ones that are, they're really driving most of the innovation.
Exactly. They're likely behind the most significant technological advancements. It's like those firms that are heavily invested in pushing the boundaries of knowledge, they're the ones generating the most potentially patentable inventions.
This really brings us back to Rassenfoss's argument, right?
Yeah.
Even though most knowledge isn't patented, patents still have a huge impact on shaping the landscape of innovation. It's like the tip of the iceberg. The patented inventions, they may be a smaller proportion, but they're often the ones making the big waves.
A great analogy, and it's essential to remember that the patent system is just one way we incentivize and manage knowledge creation. There are other models out there. This leads us to a really crucial question. What does this patent landscape mean for how knowledge is shared and used, especially for things that directly affect our well-being, like, say, life-saving medications?
It's true, this idea of knowledge sharing and the impact of the patent system, it becomes even more ethically charged when we're talking about inventions that affect people's health and well-being, like essential medicines.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical industry, it really highlights this tension. On one hand, patents are seen as crucial for driving innovation. Developing new drugs, it's so expensive, so risky. Patents give companies that period of exclusivity, to recoup their investments, maybe even make a profit. But, and it's a big but,
Yeah, it's that exclusivity that creates barriers to access, right?
yeah,
Especially for people who need those medications but can't afford the often really high prices of patented drugs.
it's a tough situation. We want to encourage the creation of life-saving treatments, but we also need to ensure that people can actually access them. It raises all these ethical and economic questions about finding that balance. How do we reward innovation while also upholding the right to healthcare?
And this tension, it gets even more amplified in emergency situations, right?
Mm.
Like during a global pandemic when every minute counts.
Absolutely. That standard 20-year patent term, it can feel like an eternity when you're facing a public health crisis that demands, immediate and widespread access to treatments.
So what can be done? What are the potential solutions to address this challenge? How can we make sure that the patent system supports innovation without making it harder to get essential medicines?
It's the million-dollar question. There are no easy answers, unfortunately. There are ongoing discussions, though. They're looking at different aspects of patent reform, trying to find ways to, streamline the patenting process for essential medicines, encourage companies to voluntarily share their patents through licensing agreements, even exploring options for price controls or what they call compulsory licensing.
Compulsory licensing.
Yeah, it's basically when a government allows someone else to produce a patented invention without the patent holder's permission, usually in, exceptional circumstances like a national emergency.
Interesting. So it sounds like finding the right balance is an ongoing process. It's not static, right?
Exactly. It requires constant evaluation, input from all sides. Scientists, policymakers, ethicists, economists, and of course, the patients themselves.
This deep dive has been, eye-opening in a lot of ways. We've uncovered so much about how we define knowledge, the fact that most of it isn't patented, and this complex relationship between the patent system and innovation.
It really highlights how intricate this innovation ecosystem is. There are so many forces at play, far beyond just patents.
And for our listeners who want to explore this further, we encourage you to check out the sources we mentioned today, Rassin-Foss's paper, the studies we discussed. You can find links to all of that in the show notes.
Absolutely. And as you delve deeper into this, I want to leave you with one final thought. If the patent system is just one way to encourage and manage knowledge creation, what other possibilities are out there? What other models could shape the future of innovation? Could we create systems that prioritize, collaboration, open sharing, and societal benefit alongside, economic gains?
It's a question worth pondering, a great note to end on. So until next time, keep those intellectual gears turning, everyone.